J-pop and anime are two of my biggest interests, and what sparked my love for both of these things is RADWIMPS. They're a four-piece rock band best known for their collaborations with Makoto Shinkai. They've reached a level of global recognition that is rarely seen among Japanese artists. But if you go beyond the surface level anime songs that most people know them for, you'll uncover one of Japan's most intriguing bands. So let's dive into the full story of RADWIMPS. RADWIMPS were formed in 2001, but their story goes all the way back to 1985, the year that Akira Kuwabara and Yojiro Noda were born. These two were among the band's founding members, and they both came in contact with music at a young age. Kuwabara was introduced to the guitar through his cousin, while Noda's connection to music came from his family. His mother was a piano teacher, and his family had a wide variety of instruments and records kept at home. Noda's family moved from Tokyo to the US when he was 6, first to Nashville and then Los Angeles, but they returned to Japan 4 years later. After first hearing Oasis in middle school, Noda spent a lot of time playing their songs. By the time they were 15, Noda was writing his own lyrics while Kuwabara was playing in a band. The two of them actually met at a Mr. Donut store in Azamino. In 2001, Noda joined the band, and so the earliest version of RADWIMPS was formed in the Kanagawa prefecture. The name was taken from combining the words rad and wimps, which put together seems like a contradiction. The original lineup consisted of Kuwabara on lead guitar, Noda on vocals, Akio Shibafuji on drums, Kei Aso on bass, and Yusuke Saki on rhythm guitar. The five of them have been friends since middle school, and their initial activities were in Yokohama. On February 5, 2002, RADWIMPS had their first live show at a small concert club. Around this time, Kuwabara dropped out of school to focus on the band, despite disapproval from those closest to him. He's known for being a pretty radical guy, and the next big decision he made was signing up the band to perform at the Yokohama High School Music Festival on the final day of applications. Now, this event wasn't held inside their local school's gym, but rather the 17,000-seater Yokohama Arena. RADWIMPS competed against 16 other musicians, and they ended up winning the grand prize with their first single, Moshimo. Although winning was a big accomplishment, something even greater came from this festival. Future RADWIMPS drummer Satoshi Yamaguchi was watching RADWIMPS from the stands with his own band. Yamaguchi was so impressed by Noda's songs that he asked him to join his own band, to which Noda declined. In May of 2003, RADWIMPS formally released Moshimo, and had their first tour across the Kanto area. The band released their self-titled debut album in July, and it featured songs that Noda wrote back in middle school. They also made another appearance at the Yokohama High School Music Festival, this time as guests though. This is where they actually met bassist Yusuke Takeda, who would later join them as well. Shortly after, the band went on hiatus, since everyone beside Kuwabara began studying for their university entrance exams. RADWIMPS returned from hiatus in March of 2004, but only Kuwabara and Noda remained. They needed new members, but instead of doing formal auditions, the pair decided to bring in Yamaguchi and Takeda. RADWIMPS started building their reputation and wasted no time in between recording music and touring. They eventually began performing at some high-profile summer music festivals, as well as hosting radio shows. With the release of their third album and first major label release in 2006, RADWIMPS were gaining a lot of traction. The album debuted at number 13 on the Oricon album chart, and it was actually released while some of the band members were still in university. Noda said that the album was recorded in single takes, and although it shifted them to a major label, RADWIMPS didn't change anything about the way they made music. By the time their fourth album was released, they had an initial shipment of over 100,000 copies to meet demands, and many of their older releases began entering the charts. Although this success was a dream come true for the band, it soon became their biggest problem. Noda felt that the band's popularity had surpassed the quality of their music. To compensate, they began to work even harder, which included sleeping overnight at the studio. But this lifestyle wasn't sustainable for them. Noda's dedication made him fall unconscious at times, and he soon realized that it wouldn't be too long before one of the other members would call it quits. Fortunately, the band came together to fix this problem, and it never affected them again. A few years later in 2009, another issue plagued the band. Yamaguchi began to suffer from a disease called focal dystonia, which causes involuntary muscular contractions. Although Yamaguchi continued band activities, the disease would eventually become too much for him to handle. By 2011, RADWIMPS had 2 chart-topping singles and 2 albums that peaked at number 2 on the Oricon chart. On March 11th of that year, Japan was tragically hit by the Tohoku earthquake. RADWIMPS had set up a donation project called Itoshiki, and for the preceding 10 years on March 11th, they released a single to commemorate its anniversary. These 10 songs were compiled into an album, and over time, the band donated over 40 million yen for the cause. Around the time their 7th album was released, 3 of the band members were already married. Time was catching up on them, but the biggest opportunity for RADWIMPS was just around the corner. In the anime film world, Makoto Shinkai is one of the most recognizable directors. His films are characterized by stunning visuals and emotional storytelling. They're frequently coming-of-age romance stories, but despite the reoccurring elements in his films, each one of them has a very distinct feel to it. In 2014, Shinkai started working on the draft of Your Name. When the film's producer Genki Kawamura asked Shinkai what his favorite bands were, he simply said RADWIMPS. So Kawamura sent an offer to Noda for RADWIMPS to do the film's music. At the time, RADWIMPS are a rock band that never made any sort of film or symphonic music before, but they jumped at the opportunity to work with Shinkai. This was especially true for Takeda, who had watched all of Shinkai's movies before working with him. Compared to writing a standalone album, Noda described working on the score as totally different. With their own albums, they express everything through themselves, but for a soundtrack, they had to switch between letting the music and animation doing the storytelling. What makes this soundtrack so special isn't the orchestrated tracks, but the 4 pop rock songs that are scattered across the film. RADWIMPS music changed the story and dialogue at times, and when a new scene was created, they adapted the music to fit it. For example, the song Zen Zen Zens plays during a montage where the 2 main characters switch bodies. However, the scene was originally much shorter and had characters talking over the music, but Shinkai thought the adjustment would better complement the song's lyrics. My personal favorite of the 4 vocal tracks is Dream Lantern, probably because it's the first RADWIMPS song I ever listened to. It starts with a quiet melody, but after 50 seconds, it explodes into this high-energy, guitar-driven track. The intro is supposedly recorded in reverse, and the song is very similar to the track that's played during the film's climax. RADWIMPS also created English versions of these 4 songs for the film's dub version, and this experience made Noda want to write more English songs in the future. Shinkai said that RADWIMPS music matched the film's message perfectly, and he wasn't the only person to think that. Your Name's score took almost a year and a half to finish, and upon release in 2016, both the film and its soundtrack was met with great praise. Your Name is the 2nd highest grossing Japanese film worldwide, and its soundtrack won an award for Best Music at the Japan Academy Prize, which is Japan's equivalent to the Oscars. Around a year after Your Name's release, Shinkai finished the script for his next project. The first person he showed it to was Noda, and 3 months after receiving it, Noda sent back 2 songs that reflected his impressions of the script. Shinkai thought that these songs were wonderful, and he now had the desire to make another film, a film that would be led by RADWIMPS music. These 2 songs became the beacon for the pair to work on Weathering With You for the next 2 years. During production, Noda thought that a woman's voice would be better suited for some of the film's songs. After a year of searching, they came across a cover album of 90s J-pop songs by Toko Miura. Although Miura was an actress who only sang as a hobby, she sent in a demo and ended up being chosen. Miura only featured in a few songs, but each one of her tracks is an absolute banger. Celebration is one of my favorite RADWIMPS songs, and Grand Escape is what made that scene in the sky feel so climatic. In spring of 2020, Shinkai and RADWIMPS began their 3rd collaboration, and this project had far more ambition than their previous 2. They wanted the sound of Suzume to be timeless, something that could be appreciated 100 years into the future. To help with this, the pair brought in video game and Hollywood film composer Kazuma Jinnouchi. This was also the first time in Shinkai's career that a soundtrack was recorded overseas, in London's Abbey Road Studios. Noda mentioned that 2 of his biggest influences for this project were actually Hans Zimmer and the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack. For Suzume's main theme, they didn't want it to be a typical pop song, and once again, they wanted to have a female voice sing it. Rather than choosing someone who simply sings well or could sell easily in 2022, they sought a voice with endless clarity. After a year of searching, they found that through TikTok sensation Towaka. Towaka's demo had the worst sound quality out of all candidates, and was probably recorded with a phone in her closet, but it was exactly what they were looking for. The soundtrack contains 29 songs in total, and there were only 2 vocal tracks used in the film, which is quite a contrast to Your Name and Weathering With You. There's 2 other vocal songs titled Tamaki and Tears of Suzume that were included in the soundtrack but not in the final movie. After Noda showed Shinkai Tamaki, which is the name of Suzume's aunt and guardian, Shinkai realized that her character was more relevant than he initially thought, and he then added more interactions between her and Suzume. Suzume's soundtrack not only matches, but arguably surpasses Your Name's score. The lack of vocal tracks helped set the mood, and it was a great change in style from Shinkai's past 2 films. There's also an Easter egg in one scene where they play Itomori High School and First Visit to KNA. Suzume became the 4th highest grossing Japanese film worldwide, and with there being rumors of another Shinkai film in the makings, we can all presume who will be helping him with the music. After their trilogy of films with Makoto Shinkai, RADWIMPS' global popularity was at its peak, so you probably expect the band to capitalize on their worldwide interests. But before we dive into that, let's catch up on what the band was doing outside of their Shinkai collaborations over the past few years. While RADWIMPS were working on the score for Your Name, they were also working on their 9th studio album, Human Bloom. It was very much influenced by Your Name and even contained several songs that didn't make it into the film. When they went on tour for this album, they notably performed as a guest act for Coldplay at the Tokyo Dome. Although everything seemed to be going great from the outside, something unfortunate was going on behind the scenes. Earlier I mentioned how their drummer Yamaguchi was suffering from focal dystonia. In the middle of them creating music for Your Name in 2015, Yamaguchi decided to leave the band on an indefinite hiatus. His condition was worsening to the point where he no longer enjoyed playing. Although Yamaguchi had to give up on his dream, he managed to build a happy life for himself outside of music. But more on that later. With Yamaguchi out of the picture, RADWIMPS needed a new support drummer, for both recordings and live shows. Yamaguchi recommended that Mizuki Mori audition for the job, as he used to work at their studio. Now, Yamaguchi must be extremely talented because RADWIMPS needed 2 people to replace him. The first being Mori, who's been with the band ever since. The second is Toshiki Hata, and he was eventually replaced by Masufumi Eno in 2020. The band released their 10th studio album at the end of 2018, and it featured the likes of Taka of One OK Rock and Amyeon, who's one of my favorite Japanese artists. On their 2021 album Forever Days, the song Twilight was originally released to commemorate One Piece manga's 100th volume and the anime's 1000th episode. The next year saw the band score their first non-Shinkai film called The Last 10 Years. It's a heart-wrenching story about a young woman diagnosed with a terminal illness, and their score finds a delicate balance between the highs and lows of the story. RADWIMPS expanded their activities outside of Japan years before the release of Your Name, but the story behind it isn't as straightforward as other bands. Japan is the world's 2nd largest music market, so a Japanese artist can be extremely successful by solely focusing on their domestic audience. Noda was always interested in performing outside of Japan, but the other band members weren't. In 2013, Noda began his own solo project called Ilion. He had launched Ilion in the UK, and most of his songs on his debut album were in English. Noda only played a few live shows as Ilion, including performances in London and Hamburg. It wasn't until 2014 that RADWIMPS toured outside of Japan, where they performed in nearby countries like South Korea and Singapore. The band celebrated their 10th anniversary in 2015, which included a few concerts in Europe. In 2016 and 19, RADWIMPS performed at Kohaku Uta Gassen, also known as Red and White Song Battle. This is a yearly New Year's Eve TV event that features a top Japanese artist, and on both of their appearances, they performed a song from one of Shinkai's films. Fast forward to 2020, and RADWIMPS planned a quote-unquote world tour that would see them come to North America for the first time. Unfortunately, these plans were cancelled because of the pandemic. Noda didn't like the restrictions during the pandemic, as he said it was impossible to enjoy concerts with masks and social distancing, but the band still followed what was asked of them. Around this time, RADWIMPS also launched an app called Shin Sekai. It's a virtual live music experience where users can listen to the band's music in a virtual world. Once pandemic restrictions were lifted in 2023, RADWIMPS announced a North American tour. When they started planning the tour, they were willing to play for only 50 or 100 people, but they ended up selling out every venue on the tour. I was lucky enough to see their second show in Toronto, and it was an amazing experience. Both the band and the crowd were full of energy, and I especially liked how Noda spent a lot of time talking to the audience. My favorite part was the jam sessions that they had back and forth between instruments, and it definitely helped those who only knew them for their anime songs better enjoy the entire set list. Noda also mentioned that the song Tummy is dedicated to his future child, which we all found pretty cute. Now that we've gone through almost everything that pertains to RADWIMPS as a band, I wanted to put the spotlight on each member. We'll start with Noda since he's the face of the band. Besides singing, Noda also plays guitar, bass, drums, violin, piano, and synth. He's written almost every song for RADWIMPS, and you don't get the full picture of his songs if you don't understand or look up his lyrics. The majority of his lyrics are written from his own experiences, and many online seem to think he's an excellent lyricist. Noda has also produced and written songs for other artists like Chara, Hime and Hanaragumi. Earlier I mentioned his solo project Ilion. He started it because he wanted to make music that had a much different sound compared to RADWIMPS. It wasn't merely an attempt to distance himself from the band. He's also released music under his own name, most notably collaborating with Kenshi Yonezu. If you haven't noticed already, Noda is known for wearing a wide variety of hats. He's also done other things outside of music. In 2015, he released a book of essays that he wrote while on the band's Grand Prix 2014 tour. That same year, he made his debut as an actor in the film Pieta in the Toilet. He received the Japan Academy Prize Rookie Award for his lead performance, and RADWIMPS also did the film's theme song. He's since featured in over 10 other TV shows and films, and from what I've read online, people seem to think he's a decent actor. Despite living in the US for only 4 years, Noda's English and mannerism in interviews would make you think he's American. I think part of the reason why RADWIMPS shows are so appealing for English listeners is because he can bridge the language barrier when talking to the audience. Although he does most of the talking at international shows, there's one country where Kuwabara usually takes the lead. Kuwabara is in charge of RADWIMPS concerts in South Korea. He speaks Korean and visits the country quite often in his spare time. Kuwabara is actually the band leader, and when he's asked about how he gets in the right headspace for a show, he responded with saying, "I always eat a banana and drink a Red Bull." Given that he's the band leader, I can presume that he was among those initially against expanding RADWIMPS activities overseas. Ironically, he said in an interview that he dreamed of playing in America as a child. If he wasn't in RADWIMPS, Kuwabara said he would have worked for the video game magazine Famitsu. He even opened his own hamburger shop called Kuwa Burger at a rock festival in 2017. For anyone who knows Bocchi the Rock, you may recognize this guitar, and RADWIMPS were even mentioned in the show, or at least we presume so as Backwimps. The member that I've overlooked most so far is definitely Yusuke Takeda, but I think that's what happens with most bassists. Takeda studied jazz at a music college, but at first he wanted to create instruments, not play them. Besides bass, he can also play the piano, synth, guitar, and steel pan. He's a big cat lover and apparently describes himself as a super masochist. Takeda is closest with Yamaguchi, and the pair used to share hotel rooms often, and Yamaguchi's wife is actually one of Takeda's childhood friends. Yamaguchi used to skip school not to play music, but to play mahjong, and it was through mahjong that he befriended one OK rock drummer Tomoya Kanki. In most photos and videos of the band, he always seems to be smiling the most, so it's great that his story has a happy ending. After Yamaguchi announced his indefinite hiatus, he eventually came across Hamaya, a small town of around 30,000 people with a view of Mount Fuji over the sea. When he saw this scenery, he felt a sincere emotion that he hadn't felt for a long time, so he moved to the town with his family. Yamaguchi eventually became a small business owner in Hamaya, running an ice cream factory and growing rice. More importantly, he's been active in researching his focal dystonia, aka musician's dystonia. He's a visiting researcher at Keio University and also collaborates with a professor of music at Stanford University. Their research focuses on health issues in drummers in the US, and through this, Yamaguchi hopes to better understand his condition and hopefully be able to perform again in the future. Fast forward to 2014, and his research team has published various papers with Yamaguchi cited as an author. The last thing I have to mention is how RADWIMPS have also appeared as a fake band called Miso Soup or Miso Shiru. They wear mustaches, glasses, and red t-shirts to signify the switch in persona. It seems to be an inside joke with fans. During a concert, RADWIMPS said that Miso Soup was invited as a guest, and when they came back on stage, the audience treated them like a completely different band. RADWIMPS have always been a popular band that consistently makes good music. They top Japanese charts as a rock band and spread their music to fans in every corner of the world through their Makoto Shinkai collaborations. All 4 members are incredibly talented. RADWIMPS are one of my favorite Japanese bands, and their music is my biggest inspiration for starting this channel. So what can we expect from RADWIMPS in the future? Besides the possibility of a 4th Makoto Shinkai collaboration, Noda said that the band might go back to their rock roots ahead of their 20th anniversary. Unfortunately, it was recently announced that Kuwabara would be leaving the band, and I presume it was due to creative differences. Given how the band's music in recent years has been more Noda-centered, it remains to be seen whether Noda will eventually leave to focus on his solo career. Needless to say, it looks very unlikely that we'll be getting a new album from RADWIMPS anytime soon. So what do you think of RADWIMPS? Has their music gotten better or worse over time? I want to point out that this video probably missed many things that Japanese listeners would know about the band, so I hope that my narrative of RADWIMPS is accurate to how those in Japan see them. I avoided mentioning any controversies in this video, but if you want to learn about some controversies that have affected RADWIMPS, check out the doc in the description. Otherwise, if I misinterpreted any info or missed any other interesting points, Let me know and I'll mention it in the pinned comment. Thanks for watching.